Both finance and activism can often feel like topics that are way over there. They're really easy to, quote unquote, get wrong. But fundamentally, activism is really just the coordination and organization of people towards a common social good or goal. And finance is just the movement of large amounts of money.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work. And if I'm honest, the thing that changes most about work from moment to moment is that the system that it exists within feels like it is cracking. I know you feel this too. The economy encourages us to be resilient, efficient, and yet wages are stagnating, inequality is growing, and the kind of financial stability that my parents expected feels so out of reach for so many of the people that I know. You know, we are taught to work hard and play the game so things will be all right. But if I'm honest with myself, I don't really think that this game was ever designed for us to win. So what do? Do we try to reform the system? Do we break the system entirely and start again? And maybe most important, how much power do we have as individuals to create a system that feels just and fair and humane? We have an incredible guest for you today, and she believes that there is an answer here, and it lies in community. Not waiting for someone or someone's in power to make new rules for us, but in fact coming together to shape a different, fairer future, one that prizes human dignity instead of capital. Jasmine Rashid calls herself a financial activist, and I'll admit that the first time I heard about her work, I thought, well, I don't know if this is for me. I don't really consider myself an activist. I don't know if you do. But Jasmine changed my mind. You see, she has this idea that activism is not about how many times you march on a weekend, how big your bullhorn is. No, she is going to tell you that it is about refusing to hand over your agency. Her book is called the Financial Activist Playbook. 8 strategies for everyday people to reclaim wealth and collective well-being. Jasmine believes that everyday people like you and me, can and must reclaim power in our financial systems. And today she's here to show us how. Here's Jasmine Rashid.
So a just economy is not a utopia. It is not a perfect world, but it is a more fundamentally fair and sustainable system of who gets to access capital, how does money flow, who gets to decide, and who gets to have both decision-making power and ownership over the flows of capital. So really what that means is a just economy is one where our culture around our economy and finance is one premised on shared value, on regeneration, as opposed to our current capitalist system that is really focused on extraction and how do we, we've seen so many just kind of blatant theft in many ways of wealth from everyday working people consolidated to the 1%. And a just economy challenges that notion that says, hey, maybe our labor actually should be valued and we should be, as everyday people, also receiving the benefits of that labor as wealth grows on aggregate.
This idea of extraction feels so of the moment, right? Capitalism demands that we grow at all costs. Yeah. We grow at all costs. That is the game. Businesses have harnessed that edict to grow at all costs, to amass wealth, even at the expense of people's well-being.
Totally.
And that hurts, and we don't like it. And I watch what happens often for people who turn their nose up at that system. They, in fact, turn their nose up at the whole idea of money, as if what it means to be a do-gooder in the world is to choose not to value money, or to be afraid of money, or to live in a certain way that suggests that money is hard to come by. You take issue with that whole belief system, right?
I do. It's been an ongoing journey for me personally, but just the idea that money is something that we so often animate with these deep emotions of whether it be fear or anxiety or feeling like money is something that we need to hold on to at all costs or we need to push away at all costs, right?
Yeah.
It shows up for everyone in different ways. But that actually feeds, again, into this culture in which everyday conversations about money are still considered taboo, right? We're still in a system in which people don't feel it is either impolite or also not their right to talk about money. And money at the end of the day is a tool. It's a tool that, our financial systems we've seen cause so much harm, but also so much good. And reminding ourselves that money is a tool that we get to decide how to use is a far cry from, I think, the current culture around it. And so just asking people to interrogate kind of what are those feelings that are coming up for you around money is always the starting place that I start with when talking about financial activism.
Well, we know we're all very uncomfortable talking about
a little
money,
uncomfortable,
right?
Yeah.
And we all exercise that in different ways. But, my 7-year-old at home is just like really starting to grasp that a lot of what he wants and needs in the world is attached to how much money he has access to.
Right.
And so he's talking about it all the time. And I find myself kind of embarrassed when he's at the playground. And this happened recently. He was at the playground and a child came who had a really amazing lunchbox. And he said to the child, "How much money does that cost?" And I found myself elbowing him. And I thought, behind that elbow, what's going on there? Like, where did my own fear and my own desire to tell my kid not to ask that question even come from?
Where do you think it came from?
I mean, for me, I know where it came from.
Oh.
I grew up in a household that said you don't talk about those things.
Right.
And the only time I witnessed those things being talked about was when my parents were really stressed out about not having enough. How about you?
Yes. Similarly, I definitely grew up kind of with a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Ironically, because I experience in my, first 18 years of life, a real kind of change in class. My dad is an immigrant from Bangladesh. My parents met as car salespeople here in Queens. And my dad ended up becoming a stockbroker on Wall Street. And so my early years, I had something that most kids don't have, right? I had an in-house financial expert. And I also had someone who really could share with me the volatility of our financial systems. 1 year making tens of thousands of dollars, and the next year making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so my experience, though I experience a level of upward mobility that, again, most people don't experience in their lifetimes, that culture of scarcity never left me. I'm home with my grandpa right now. I'm visiting in New York, and we're couponing together, right? One of the really fun things about financial activism to me is that we get to approach it both from the individual level and the collective level. And so at the individual level, financial activism is about the decisions we make with our own money or influencing the money around us. But it's really rooted in this idea of collective action, of not just building, generational wealth for your one singular family, but how do we build communities of wealth? How do we build communities of abundance and well-being? And so I think for many of us, especially not to stereotype, but people who really care about other people, which we tend to see, women, folks of color, people who have come from marginalized identities, it can be really uncomfortable to say, I'm trying to build wealth for myself, but it can actually feel really accessible to say, oh, yeah, of course I want to build wealth for my community, right?
Right. So there's a way in which you can actually access a bit of comfort and even strength from thinking beyond just yourself.
Because we'll use terms like community wealth building, but people often forget that we're also a part of community. Like, community is not something that happens over there. We all belong to a community.
We live in a very individualistic culture.
That's right.
Right? We think about the I. We believe in self-agency. And in fact, we believe that individuals should be able to solve all problems, even the big, messy, systemic problems for which there is no individual solve. There are only collective solves.
Right.
And so help me in that framing understand why building wealth for communities matters.
Yeah. So obviously we're social creatures. Our quality of life is so dependent not just on how much money we have, but the quality and depth of our relationships, right? There are so many studies we can point to. And yet it is uncomfortable often to grapple with the reality that money doesn't buy happiness. It can support the conditions, right? The stability, the flexibility to really lean into and have the spaciousness to access what, builds those states of happiness. But that also challenges fundamentally a system that says, like, you must work hard in order to receive a quality of life. And that is codified, obviously, in our healthcare systems, in our, lack of kind of wide social benefits.
Yeah.
And so money is often tied, we think of it really primarily as income. What is the income that we're having that we can then use to support? But money is so much more than just what job do we have and what money is flowing in. And so community wealth building as a concept really asks us to think more broadly about what kind of communities do we want to live in, right? We think about saving for retirement. I know personally, even if I'm solid in retirement, I don't want to do it alone. I want to be able to retire with my friends, right? And make sure that they're not having to work until the day they die.
Well, and as you're talking about wealth building, I think you do a beautiful job of reminding us that capital is anything we ascribe value to. And we're very quick to narrow it down and call capital money and money capital, and that's what we focus on. But actually, there's a lot of capital that we overlook, right?
Yeah. So much capital. I mean, so everything from it's not what you know, but who you know, right? Social capital.
Social capital.
It is the world around us that often goes unnoticed in terms of natural capital, right? It's, I don't know where I'd be without the sunshine on my face, right? Well-being is not even a concept, right, for me in that scenario. And so,
and then there's time,
and then
right? Time to me, we are going through a moment where we are realizing that our attention can be measured in time and that time is valuable. And we are just now learning to ascribe value.
And attention also as a form of capital, right? Because that is kind of what allows us to engage and build together. So time, resources, knowledge, skills, language, there is so many forms of capital, but again, aren't valued in a traditional market setting.
Right. So how do we begin to expand the aperture?
Yeah. So I think, zooming back into the personal, I think that the work of financial activism and really welcoming people into the conversation must be deeply accessible, but it also has to be interesting. It has to be fun, right? Like there's so much in this world that is scary and heartbreaking. And so for me, it's actually really important to frame these conversations and not just what are we fighting against, but what are we fighting for? What are we trying to gain? What are the systems, the infrastructure, the types of businesses that we want to actually have in our communities? And I find that often helps people just be invited to imagine a little bit more deeply. And so really reminding people to start where they are, I think so often, again, like we talked about, for both finance and activism can feel like something that even people who are quote unquote seasoned in either of those areas can be like, well, I don't have X experience or I don't have X degree. And so reminding people we're talking again about the coordination of people and the movement of money, which affects every single one of us in some degree. And we actually all have a role to play because we're all experts in our own lived experience.
Yeah.
No one is going to know better than you how much, groceries cost for your family or how many vacations you want to take a year. Like that is only something that you can decide. And therefore, that has to be taken into reality because people are not going to want to sign up for a movement in which they are also feeling like, well, why would I contribute to something that isn't increasing my quality of life and my family's quality of life?
Talk to us about buying, purchasing, and how we can apply this lens to the purchases that we make.
Yeah. So I often push a little bit against the concept of conscious consumerism.
Just for a couple of us, myself included, who don't use that term every day. That's just the nudge that my wife gives me whenever she sees me pull up the Amazon app to please use something else or go down the street to a local business.
Yeah. You're
saying like those kinds of decisions aren't the decisions that are really going to move us toward progress?
No, so I think so. That's a good clarification. So I think that so often conscious consumerism is framed as conscious, as kind of thoughtful, but really the definition of conscious is painfully aware. Which is not like a super fun term.
No.
And consumerism, again, is this idea that kind of is a little bit dehumanized. It's a little bit kind of just focusing on the transactions. And so conscious consumerism will often lead people, ironically, to overconsumption and saying that, like, well, I'm just going to buy the better version of all of the products and the things, when really the deeper kind of inquiry here is, what are the types of businesses that I want to be supporting? What do I realistically need? And where are the places where I can reclaim agency over my spending? Because for the majority of us, most of our purchases are on autopay, whether that's literally on autopay in terms of our subscriptions, or it's on kind of just autopay in terms of moving through the world of
I always
People
get
don't
this
have
kind
the
of
capacity.
toothpaste.
Yeah.
I don't have the capacity
Yeah.
to analyze this decision.
And I've seen so often people just get really frustrated and saying, well, like, I'm expected to buy, I feel like, not that anyone's watching us, and we're obviously more self-conscious and thinking about what others think of us more.
Right.
But in activist spaces, it can feel, again, like a negative lens of saying, well, how do I try and avoid, bad products or companies
Right.
when, like, the reality is we live in such a complex and often multifaceted world of supply chains, of really being able to, something may have really great social impact, but really terrible economic impact or environmental impact, right?
Right.
On a different population. And so no one has the capacity to all the time be able to discern every single product they're making. And sometimes that the idea that that might be something that is expected can actually turn people off. And so I like to point to tools that, help if you're at a grocery and you want to scan something, seeing if there's any kind of like major red flags in like supply chains. But I also try to encourage people to think about their local community.
Yeah.
What are the businesses? Who are the relationships that you actually have in your community? And again, what are the types of businesses, products that you want to see exist into the more just economy that we're building? Because again, there's no perfect roadmap or answer for everyone.
But when you decide that you need an air conditioning unit, true story, something that happened to my family recently, and you look around in your local neighborhood to see, is there a place that sells it?
Yeah.
And then you walk down the street and you spend some time talking to the guy behind the counter. He gives your kid a piece of candy and he shows you the 3 he has. And by the way, none of them are the ones that Wirecutter says are the best ones to get online, but they all work fairly well.
Sure.
You might make the decision to buy your air conditioner there.
Yeah. And that's not just about like the product, right? Again, it's about the relationship, and it's about the long-term sustainability of building an economy that is actually inclusive.
Is it too far to say that kind of what you're advocating for is to put people back into the economy?
That's a beautiful way to frame it. Yeah. Economy as kind of a concept is really the idea of management of home, right? That's like the kind of origins of the word itself. And so to me, home is people. It's also the planet, right? Thinking about kind of beyond just humans, but also our natural planet, our natural resources. And I found it so ironic for the pandemic, for example, when people were saying, well, the economy, we don't want to ruin the economy. And so valuing the economy as this like abstract concept over human lives, over human dignity, is just ironic, because who is the economy for? Yeah. It's supposed to be for all of us.
Well, and then let's stay on the pandemic for 1 minute.
Sure.
I was just reflecting over the weekend with some friends about how we feel a little guilty that we feel nostalgic for the pandemic. And the reason that, and look, this doesn't discount the incredible loss that we felt personally in our own communities and more broadly. But during that period, I was home with a new baby and had a full-time job and did not have access to any of the things that I, as in fairly affluent people, pay for.
Yeah.
Like childcare, somebody else to do my grocery shopping, or somebody else to go to the pharmacy for me to pick up that delivery. And so we had to go meet our neighbors who we'd lived next to for a year and a half and never talked to. And they had twins, my baby's age. And we rigged up this situation that seems wild to think about now, where like the babies would all go to one apartment and the adults would go to another, and we'd kind of work next to each other, and somebody would make lunch and somebody else would go watch the babies so somebody could go for a run. All the money came out of all the transactions, and we had to barter based on goodwill and relationships, and we had to work on strengthening those relationships all the time. We had to work through conflict when we got annoyed with each other, which was all the time. And we came away feeling so good. Yeah. So good that we were like, we're going to preserve this. And then we didn't. Right? As soon as we could pay for all of those services again, we immediately did.
Why do you think that is?
Because we didn't know how to value. We didn't have a name for the type of capital that we were tapping. And so we didn't know how to substitute and value that capital.
Yeah. What you're describing to me sounds like a form of mutual aid. Mutual aid is often posited as this kind of radical alternative to our current economic systems. But to me, it's actually the infrastructure that so many communities in times of non-pandemic, but in times of various crisis, have found really to be their strength. But it's hard to maintain those when we live in a broader culture that doesn't talk about the value of mutual aid. Again, this is totally kind of cultural, and in certain communities, mutual aid is expected, right? I know that, like, for my grandmother is an immigrant from Bangladesh, like, there's always just random aunties in the house who would be warming up food for her and watching TV, and they'd be sharing gossip and stories. And, that to me also was a part of mutual aid, because it was, the kind of things that contributed to well-being that were outside of the transactional realm.
Right.
And so I think that a large part of financial activism, again, is trying to seed a culture in which mutual aid is more normalized and not something that we just do in times of crisis. I think that we have to start with tiny experiments, with small and, ways of identifying who are the trusted relationships that I already have, and what are the ways that we already share value, and how can we just begin to name that? There are many forces that are telling us that it's not the right thing to do, and we should instead buy solutions.
Yeah.
But yeah, starting exactly where we are, and just like even patting ourselves on the back and saying like, all right, we do have the capacity to lean into these alternative systems, and in fact, we've been doing it our whole lives.
Jasmine, let's talk about budgets. I've never succeeded at a budget.
Can I ask what budgeting means to you?
Budgeting to me means looking over the whole of the money that I think is coming in and thinking about the things that we need to pay for as a family, and somehow agreeing with my wife about what we're going to pay for, and then holding us accountable.
Sure. Yeah.
How should I think about budgeting?
And I think this comes back to like really the idea of personalizing our experience in the economy. Like, we are the experts in our own reality when it comes to, again, how much time we want to actually spend running through numbers and making spreadsheets. For some people, it is a way to just think about what are the kind of non-negotiables, what are the big pieces, and where's the flexibility. And so something that my husband and I are experimenting with is just getting a sense of what does enough feel like to us?
Yeah.
Like, the quality of life that we have right now is not perfect, but it's really sweet, actually. And we're realizing that as we decide to kind of further our careers and think about the type of income we need, there is a difference between what our needs and our wants are. But we really want to make sure that we're grounding in the kind of flexibility to not fall into the trap of perfectionism. Because as soon as we start thinking like, oh, we missed a few line items, or we're not doing it on the cadence that we thought, we're just going to say, screw it. Like, we have other things to do that are more important, or that feel like they're actually contributing to like making that income. And so I think budgeting, to your point, is fundamentally about just tracking the flows of money in and out. But I think that when we begin to approach it as, what works for me and my family and my community, that's where we begin to kind of give ourselves a little more room and flexibility to experiment.
Well, you just answered my question for me, right? The thing that I can't stand about budgeting is that I actually don't know what enough is. When I am so fearful that every system in the future will be infinitely more expensive and ever more brittle, it's very difficult to come back to this moment and say, I know what enough is, and therefore I can plan well.
Right. You use the word systems, and this is where we toggle between the personal and the collective, right? And so when I think about Social Security, for example, there are so many economists who tell us if we were to add an additional 1% tax on the 1% on the ultra wealthy, we would be able to replenish Social Security and build more stability, right? But again, that often feels it feels like a impossible task to somehow coordinate and organize and push for policy change, especially in this climate. But it also feels like an impossible task to even think about how you would do that at an individual level. So my approach to that is, listen, if we are experiencing this uncertainty and this fear, we might as well do it together. And when we lean into that concept of together, that's where we get to collective organizing. And that is where we get to places that are, organizing for everything from petitions to rallies to letter writing campaigns. But I can begin to work on what is the future that I'm envisioning for my community? And when I say community, I should probably clarify, I feel like I belong to many communities, and many people do, right? I have my neighbors, my proximate community. I have my family. I have the cultural identities that I'm a part of in the diasporas. But community really is a pretty all-encompassing term because it's just all of the people that we come in contact with, and they're not going to all be our besties, right? But we know that all of our well-being is interlinked. And we know that there's enough to go around if we look at just purely the numbers of living in the wealthiest society in the history of the world. And so finding more people who are on that same mission as you and excited, even if it's the small actions, to me feels really worthwhile and is what gives me hope to continue doing this work.
One exciting aspect of the conversation that you and I are having is that I approach these conversations through the lens of a Gen Xer. Mm-hmm. Like the circumstances of my financial life were shaped by an economy that largely still worked. It wasn't easy, but I could figure out how to buy a house on my own steam by applying myself right. Many of the promises of the America of the 20th century held enough that I could at least get started with them. Mm-hmm. You are a zillennial, right? You're mostly Z with a tiny little bit of millennial.
I'm on the cusp, yeah, 96.
Okay, fine. Cusper. And so the promise looks very different to you.
That's right.
And my guess is the environment feels very different to you. How would you define that difference?
Yeah. So I can't generalize and speak for all of us, but public sentiments show that the majority of Gen Z, even just hearing the term capitalism, comes with a negative reaction. And to me, that's actually hopeful news. Because what that means is that we are not only thinking, well, this system doesn't work for us, but we're by saying that this is not something that we identify with, we're making space for new systems to emerge. And what that new system looks like is called, or is kind of codified as, matters less to me than the idea that people are looking for something better. Yeah. They're saying, people are finally standing up and saying, this economy actually doesn't work for 99% of us. But 99% of us are contributing to this economy and financial system. I think that for my generation, we're beginning to remember that this is a quote from Alice Walker, the author, that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And I think that with social media, with just access, younger people are reminded that we have more power than maybe we've been told by older generations, and that our buying power, our investing power, our spending power is only going to grow. And so I'm feeling both things. I'm feeling heartache and deep excitement and imagination and creativity for what's been built so far and all that is to be built.
That was Jasmine Rashid. Her book is the Financial Activist Playbook. You can find it wherever you buy your books. I think Jasmine would probably even tell you to check it out at your local library. So much of what we talked about really has stuck with me since this conversation. First and foremost, this idea that the most important capital that we have is actually not money, right? It's people, it's our relationships, it's each other, it's social capital. I've been thinking a lot about where and how I'm investing in my social capital because it carries me, and I find that it leaves me feeling very rich. Now, we're going to talk about this and so much more on Office Hours this week. I hope you'll join us. I'll get together with our senior producer, Sarah Storm, this Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can always find us on the LinkedIn news page, or you can check the show notes for a link. I'll drop one there. And if you loved this episode, if it made a difference for you, I hope you'll share it. That's how we bring others into our community and our conversation. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me in the studio. I'll be right back here next Monday with more from Hello Monday. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. Lolia Briggs and Rachel Karp produce our show. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gadron. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever. Kyle Ransom Walsh is editor-at-large of Editorial Graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. See you next week.